Are you a flight instructor who is planning on doing freelance flight instruction? If so, you may have wondered, in the event of an accident, would the aircraft insurance policy cover you while you're doing the training for an approved pilot on the policy? If there was a deductible, who would pay for it? And is there extra wordings that you can add onto the aircraft insurance policy that can help protect you as a freelance flight instructor even more? Well, if you have wondered these things, no worries, because it's Caleb Winterburn here from Air 101, and we're gonna talk about it. I'm an aviation insurance broker as well as a commercial pilot, and I have been doing aviation insurance for 10 plus years. And rarely over the years do I find a freelance flight instructor that knows about the insurance aspect of flight training. So that is why I'm making this video for you. So let's get straight to it and talk about 4 things that you as a freelance flight instructor can do to help protect you in the event of an accident. Number 1, training an approved pilot. So a pilot goes and buys an aircraft, and then they come and ask you to train them on that aircraft. At this point, you may wonder, do I need to get added onto that individual's aircraft insurance policy, or am I automatically covered to train that individual on their aircraft? Well, here is the thing that you'd have to double check on the individual's aircraft insurance policy. An approved pilot other than test flights, not in flight, and upgrading instruction. 31, we will not pay under any of the coverages for any loss, damage, or liability if at the time of the occurrence, a pilot other than an approved pilot shown on the policy data page is pilot in command of the aircraft. Nor will we pay if the pilot in command of the aircraft does not hold a valid current pilot's license with all aircraft type, ratings, and endorsements required by law for the flight. However, the following are permitted. A pilot employed by a Transport Canada approved maintenance organization may act as pilot in command of the aircraft for the purpose of test flying the aircraft after maintenance work has been performed on the aircraft. B, while the aircraft is not in flight, the aircraft may be started and operated by a person who is competent to control the aircraft and qualified to do so. C, a pilot providing an approved pilot as shown on the policy data page with upgrading flight instruction may act as pilot in command of the aircraft. Upgrading flight instruction means flight instruction given strictly in accordance with all applicable Transport Canada regulations for the purpose of upgrading a valid powered aircraft pilot license held by the pilot shown as approved on the policy data page, and includes instruction or examination for an instrument rating, float endorsement, aircraft type endorsement, and multi-engine endorsement. So before we fully dive into part C of this wording, you would want to first check this. Notice how it says a pilot providing an approved pilot as shown on the policy data page. So you'll have to go to the approved pilot section of the policy and first make sure the person that you're training is actually on the policy as an approved pilot. The reason why I want to mention this is because I have seen it where the individual who owns the aircraft does not get themselves named as an approved pilot on the policy just to try and save some money on there. They say to themselves, my flight instructor has a lot of hours, so I'm just going to tell the insurance company that the flight instructor is going to be the one flying the aircraft. But in this case, if you as a flight instructor try and train them and they're not listed as an approved pilot on the policy and an accident happens, most likely the claim would be denied. Now, the tricky thing about this section is it says for the purpose of upgrading a valid powered aircraft pilot's license held by the pilot shown as approved on the policy data page, and includes instruction for examination for an instrument rating, float endorsement aircraft, type endorsement, and multi-engine endorsement. See, it doesn't say anything about a night rating or an OTT rating or even just doing check rides. I have over the years tried to get the aviation insurance companies to amend this wording, but I haven't been able to get it done yet. In saying that, the aviation insurance companies always tell me that if somebody's just doing their night rating or they're getting a check ride, then most likely it would be covered in the event of an accident. But to be on the safe side, if you plan on doing a night rating or do a check ride for someone, just ask the aircraft owner to send an email to their aircraft insurance broker so that they can note the file with the aviation insurance company. Now, what if the person's a student pilot and they're just training to get their private pilot's license? Are you covered under this section to train them? Not necessarily. Instead, you will need the training endorsement added onto the policy. This is the training endorsement, and it reads this way. 1. This policy is amended effective March 8th, 2022, as detailed in A to D below, to permit the use of your aircraft for basic flight training instruction, referred to as instruction, of the persons listed in A below as follows. A. The definition of pleasure and business in paragraph 44B of this policy is amended to include the use of your aircraft for the instruction of John Doe. referred to as the student. B, the instruction must be pursuant of a private pilot's license for the student, must be conducted by a properly qualified flight instructor, referred to as the instructor, and must be in accordance with all the applicable Transport Canada regulations. C, while the aircraft is being used for instruction of the student. In the subsection, it reads, the instructor pilot may act as pilot in command of the aircraft. The instructor pilot is added as an insured under this policy, but only with respect to liability coverage F, third-party liability, or coverage G, passenger coverage, whichever you purchased for your aircraft, and only for liability arising out of those operations which are covered by this policy. And if you purchase liability coverage G, passenger coverage for your aircraft, that coverage is restricted to apply only to the liability of the student to his or her instructor. Coverage G is limited to $100,000 Canadian per person until student is licensed and has obtained 75 total hours. The endorsement is pretty self-explanatory, but I want to highlight a couple things. It mentions in there that you need to be a properly qualified flight instructor. Well, what does that mean? If you only have fixed gear time and then you want to train a student pilot on a tailwheel aircraft, then in this case, you most likely are not a properly qualified flight instructor for training on that type of an aircraft until you have sufficient tailwheel time. So if a loss happens, once again, the claim would most likely be denied. Also in coverage D, it says the passenger coverage is limited to $100,000 per passenger. So even if the individual went and bought $2 million combined single liability coverage, which is basically a blanket limit between the third-party liability and the passenger coverage, and you were flying a Cessna 172 with your student, and they wanted to bring a passenger in the back of the aircraft, and then you were to have an accident, the passenger would not get more than $100,000 until the student has obtained their license and has more than 75 hours total time. That's why it's not always the best idea to take passengers with you when you're training a student pilot, unless those passengers understand that the coverage is limited while the student pilot is doing their training and working towards the 75 hours total time. Also, please note that these wordings vary from aviation insurance company to aviation insurance company. So if you're planning on doing a lot of freelance flight instruction, it is best to be familiar with this section of the policy with each insurance company. Now, the nice thing is in Canada is there is only really a handful of aviation insurance companies, so it's not that hard to learn a little about each one. One thing to think about as well with this part of the policy wording, if you need to fly the aircraft without the approved pilot in the aircraft, then you'll have to get yourself named on the policy as an approved pilot. And remember, just because you're a flight instructor does not mean that you're automatically covered to fly the individual's aircraft without an approved pilot being in that aircraft. Now, one day you're flying the aircraft with an approved pilot and you've done everything properly as per the policy wording, but unfortunately you go and crash the aircraft. Or maybe your student pilot goes and crashes the aircraft. Who is going to pay for the deductible in the event of this claim? Well, that leads us right into our next section. Number 2, waiver forms and deductibles. I personally recommend if you're planning on training an individual, you should have them sign a waiver form that waives their rights from suing you in the event of a loss. Now, in saying that, waiver forms don't always hold up in court, but they do often deter people from suing you. You could possibly find one online, but I recommend that you have it reviewed by a lawyer. To be honest, I just have to say that so you don't sue me in the event that something actually happens. Now, in this waiver form, you'll want to have a section that specifically talks about deductibles and who will pay for the deductible in the event of a loss. As the insurance market hardens, which means the insurance companies are raising their prices to try and recoup some money because of all the accidents over the last couple of years, they are also in most cases increasing the deductibles on aircraft insurance policies. So if an aircraft owner's insurance policy has, let's say, a $1,000 deductible, $2,500 deductible, or a $5,000 deductible, you'll want to make sure that this is outlined in that agreement in the event of an accident that the aircraft owner will cover the deductible even if you were the one to crash the aircraft. Or maybe you would pay 50% and they would pay 50% of the deductible. This is very, very important to do this before you start training that individual on their aircraft. I know when I did my flight training, before I was allowed to train on the flight school's aircraft, I had to sign a waiver form that included the section that if there was an accident, I would be the one paying for the deductible. What is another thing that you should have included in the waiver form? Well, that leads us into the next section of this video. Number 3, additional insured and a waiver of subrogation. You will want to be named on the individual's aircraft aircraft insurance policy as an additional insured with respect to liability, including a waiver of subrogation with respect to hull. Well, that's a lot of insurance jargon, so what does that really mean? Basically, in the event of a loss, if the aircraft owner crashes the aircraft and they have bought full coverage and it's a complete write-off, the insurance company is most likely going to cut them a check less the deductible. But here's the thing, this is what could possibly happen afterwards. If the insurance company deems the loss happened because of something you did, they could then essentially step into the insured's shoes, or in this case, the aircraft owner's shoes, and then try and sue you to get their money back. Now, if you have this wording on the individual's aircraft insurance policy, in most cases, it will actually take the right away from the insurance company to sue you afterwards in the event of a loss. Now, the exact wording is this. Let's say I was a flight instructor and I had a company named Air 101 Ltd. It should read my company's name and address, such as Air 101 Ltd, 10101 Ave, Sky High, BC, Alpha 1 India, 0 Romeo 1, is an additional insured with respect to liability, including a waiver of subrogation with respect to hull. Now, the reason why I try to use a company name is in a lot of cases, the aviation insurance companies don't like to use personal names on aircraft insurance policies as additional insureds. Some insurance companies will add personal names, but majority want the individual to have a company name. So if you have a company name, it gives you a lot higher chance of getting it added onto the individual's aircraft insurance policy. Now, here is one of the most crucial steps you need to do in order to make this wording work. You have to make sure that the individual has all risk flight and ground coverage. This is a comprehensive insurance package for the individual's aircraft. You should also have in that waiver form a section that says that the aircraft owner will maintain all risk flight and ground coverage while you are doing training for them. Now, this brings us to our last section. Number 4, professionalism. Deliver professional and competent flight instruction in accordance to the Canadian aviation regulations and document everything properly. I really wanted to have this section in the video because the more professional you are as a flight instructor, the easier it is for the insurance company to be able to pay out a loss in the event of a claim. As a flight instructor, especially training student pilots, it is important that you keep the pilot records up to date and have a proper sign-out sheet that is done each and every flight, whether it is on paper or it is done electronically. The reason being is this: let's say that you approve the student pilot to go out flying, but they don't sign the sign-out sheet and an accident happens. The insurance company could possibly say that they were not under direct supervision of the flight instructor, and a loss could possibly be denied. Also, when you're training a student pilot, you want to always teach in accordance with Transport Canada regulations, because if you don't, and then a pilot goes and flies the aircraft and crash one day, they could potentially sue you for teaching them incorrectly. Of course, you could go out and buy a professional liability policy for a situation like this, but I'm guessing that you don't want to spend another $2,500 to $5,000 on this type of a policy, because as a flight instructor, you probably are already not making that much money doing flight training. If you do want to know more about a professional liability policy for flight instructors, then stay tuned as I'll be making a future video on that topic. Now, I can already see, since you made it to this part of the video, you must be a very, very professional flight instructor, because 1, you made it through 10 to 15 minutes of a boring insurance video, and 2, you're trying to make sure that you, your student, and everyone around you is protected by learning more about the aircraft insurance policy and its wordings. Today, you've just learned the basics about aircraft insurance with regards to freelance flight instruction. But once again, to break it down, and please note, it's not limited to just these 4 things that we've talked about today. Try and do this checklist each and every time that you plan on training an individual on their aircraft. Number 1, check you are covered under the section unapproved pilot other than test flights, not in flight, and upgrading instruction, and or under the training endorsement part of the policy. 2, student pilot has filled out and completed a waiver form and confirmed deductibles, and that they have all risk flight and ground coverage. Number 3, student pilot has the flight instructor named as an additional insured, including a waiver of subrogation. Number 4, sign-out sheets are always done and documents are always up to date, and everything is done according to Transport Canada regulations. Now, if you possibly want to go from freelance flight instructing to starting your own flight school, then you should watch this video right here that talks about starting a flight school, 6 things you need to know. Now, I really hope that you learned something today. Stay safe, have fun instructing, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.